It seems to be fairly well known that Vexx had a bit of trouble in its development, with some content and ideas not making it into the final game. But how much was really cut? And what levels? What Wraithhearts? What did this all look like? Now, armed with information both old and new, we're about to get a much closer look at the game that could have been. What is this new information, you might be wondering? Well, I found text files hidden on the GameCube disc, and they're a treasure trove of information on what the game used to be like. There's a lot of neat info in there, but what we're really interested in right now is in the worlds and in the Wraithhearts within those worlds. But before we begin, a little bit of background on the world of Astara. From the beginning, the world of Astara was meant to be a massive place. It contained 6 worlds: forest, desert, mountain, water, fire, and ice. 3 of these worlds were huddled around the Landspire, which was in the middle of the main continent. The other 3 were on floating islands nearby. Each of these 6 worlds had 3 levels within it, and they were interconnected so Vexx could move from one level directly into another. There's even some evidence suggesting that not only could Vexx go from one level to another, but also from one world into another, and that he had to travel through all of these on foot until he could get to the Landspire halfway through the game. And then he would open up the Rift Hub, which would allow him to access the other 3 worlds. But we're not going to be getting into that today. That's kind of outside of our scope. The point of all of this is that the world of Astara was a very large, unified place. It felt like it was all part of one universe. This is a far cry from the final game, which simply features 9 isolated levels floating in space, all orbiting around the Landspire. Anyway, with that little tidbit of info in mind, let's jump right in. We've got 144 Wraithhearts to go, so we better get going. First up is Timberdale. You'll quickly notice that a lot of the objectives in this one are actually familiar, with the biggest change being that there are only 6 of them. While the game was intended to have 18 levels, these levels were smaller, and when 9 of them were cut, bits and pieces of them got added back into the other 9 levels, which makes them larger and more varied as a result. In this particular case, Timberdale received a piece of the water level with the towers, and of course that brought in a few more Wraithhearts with it. But until that change took place, it looks here like we had just a single Wraithheart up on top of the waterfall. This is a pretty common trend throughout the game, and it's one that we're going to be seeing a few more times. Other than that, though, not a whole lot has changed in this level. We've got the interconnected worlds, you can see the Landspire and the Fire World and stuff like that, and if you look at the main tree in the middle of Timberdale, it actually has leaves on it. Leaves on a tree, imagine that. All in all, though, this level is pretty close to the final, but that's definitely not the case for all the levels we're going to look at. Better hold on, because things are going to get pretty crazy soon. Next up is the Overwood, Vexx's hometown. This treetop town was cut almost entirely from the game, with only small traces of it remaining, mostly consisting of a short scene in the opening video. But as we can see here, it was once a full-fledged level. A lot of the objectives shown here are pretty mysterious. I don't really know how they looked or played, though if you look at the second objective, it looks like it might have actually been a stealth mission. Not sure how I feel about that. And then that third one kind of looks like the objective in Timberdale, where Vexx has to shatter the container using his rock suit, but it's hard to be sure. And then that fourth one kind of looks like it's related to the soccer ball, but maybe not. Oh, and one more thing I forgot to mention in the last level. Notice that the Wraithheart shards are color-coded. One level from each world has red shards, one has blue, and one has gold. I'm guessing this was sort of a visual cue to help the player keep track of all the shards that they were collecting. Interestingly, quite a few screenshots do show blue shards, but we don't really see the other ones yet. And now we're off to the Neverglades. Like Timberdale, a lot of this is going to look familiar to you. That second objective might be the heart near the waterfall that Vexx had to fly into, but it's hard to tell. But what's really interesting here is what's inside the tree. In the final game, going inside the giant tree will take you to the Temple of Nenaik. But in this version, there's an arbor inside the tree. I think this is it here. But again, relatively little has changed in this level. Now here's one idea that never made it into the final game. Secret hearts. Though they don't seem all that secret seeing as there are hints for them. I don't know. These hearts could show up anywhere in the world that they're in, so in this case, you could find them in Timberdale, in the Overwood, or in the Neverglades. And you'll notice the soccer ball mission from the final game is here. Although strangely, the last objective in the list almost looks like it's related to the soccer ball as well, which brings us up to 3 sphere-related objectives. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe the people who made this just really liked soccer. The 4th objective here is a surprise. Vexx had to race against a shadowy doppelganger, which kind of sounds like a mix between Shadow Mario and Il Piantissimo from Super Mario Sunshine. The crazy thing about this is that there's actually a performance file for Shadow Vexx still on the game disc. That is, the path data that this doppelganger would follow is still in the final game. There just doesn't seem to be a way of using it. I tried to get Vexx to use this data at the very beginning of the game when he runs into Timberdale, but the game didn't like that very much. And finally, we have the mysterious letters, which, as it turns out, are the sigils, one of which is that mysterious beta item that you saw in my other video. When the devs went through and removed all the sigils, they seem to have forgotten that one in Frostblight Mill. Lucky for us. There were 36 of these, one corresponding to each letter and number in the Estani language. Collecting 6 sigils in one world would reveal a Wraithheart, but collecting all 36 in the entire game would apparently unlock the secrets of the Estani language. It's hard to say what this would have looked like in the game, but early articles about it do mention unlocking secrets using the language this way. Dragon Reach follows in the pattern of Timberdale. Not much to see here. The biggest difference is that there are no underwater ruins to be seen here, but surprise surprise, we're going to be seeing those later. The Temple of Nanaik was its own level before it got grafted into the Neverglades. Hearts 1 and 2 will look familiar, of course, and I think the 3rd one would be the block puzzle from Daggercrag. Some of the Wraithhearts have labels, and this one is called Climbing Cavern. As for the 4th one, completing a ring puzzle would have opened the door to the boss. It says you're sure to have a ball. Do we know any bosses that fit that description? Yeah. And if we needed any confirmation that that is in fact the mummy that was to be fought in this level, there's even an entry in this one document that says, "Door to mummy boss open." Seems pretty likely to me. And no, I don't know what those yellow Smarties are. Daggercrag is a familiar level, and most of its objectives are familiar. This one both lost and gained content along the way, kind of like the Neverglades. If you look at that 3rd heart, it kind of sounds like a flying objective, but the title is actually Beast Race, which might mean it has to do with this 2-legged camel thing seen in early footage. Also, there's no lighthouse here. And that's about it for the main hearts in this level, but I think we're going to be seeing a little bit more of it later. For Heart 1 here, apparently Vexx had to fly left from the Dragon Skull and fly into Daggercrag, where he could find a Wraithheart up on top of a pillar somewhere. Remember that each world was one seamless environment with the levels being connected together. And here you can see where some of the connecting terrain used to be before it was removed. The last 2 hearts here are kind of mysterious. They do have names, but the names are put in the wrong order, so it's hard to tell which one is which. One of these is Mini Monastery, and the other is a boss battle of some kind. If I had to guess, I would say that the monolith might be the boss battle, and then the inner base might be the mini monastery, but that's just speculation. Oh, and one more thing about World 2. In between the 2 levels, there was a desert. This flat, sandy pit area, as seen here. According to game designer Kynan Pearson, there was an elevator in this desert that would take Vexx down to the Temple of Nanaik. As can be seen in the game's files, there was also a creature called the Magnasliff, which would attack Vexx if he went into the desert, and the best way to escape from it was by taking this elevator. Here's a regular Sliff, by the way. Summit of the Sages. Here we have not 1 but 2 areas that got added later in development. The 3rd heart here is called Jinx Head, with Jinx being an early name for Vexx, the character. It seems that a Wraithheart was awarded simply for hitting the 3 detonators and uncovering the Vexx face. As we know, in the final version, doing this opens a door to another area. And it's a similar deal for the 4th heart here. Vexx just had to swim through all the underwater rings, and then the underwater statue would let go of the Wraithheart she was holding and he could collect it, simple as that. In the final version, swimming through these rings opens up a lantern that she's holding, and that lantern leads to another area, which we are going to be seeing later. I think it's funny how the final version of the hint takes a jab at this, by calling the rings cheesy. It almost seems like an inside joke by the developers, making fun of the old version of a challenge. Now all these changes to the level ended up introducing a little side effect. Normally, when you open the door to a new area, the game saves that, and it always remembers it and keeps the door open every time you play the game. But in the case of the doorway under the Vexx head, it forgets every time you turn off the game. So the next time you play, you have to hit the detonators and open the door again. As it turns out, this value is labeled as persistent instead of save. Since revealing the Vexx face only granted a Wraithheart, there wasn't a lot of reason for it to always be uncovered every time you played the game. By making it persistent, the face would stay uncovered as long as you were still playing the game, and it would remain for that session. But now that this leads to a whole new area in the final game, it can get a little bit frustrating when you come back to the game only to find that you need to climb up to the top, hit the detonators, and open the door all over again. Another difference in Summit of the Sages is that it was a lot more integrated with some of the other levels that you're going to be seeing in just a second. The first of which is Tempest Peak Manor. This castle stood on top of a small mountain in the Summit of the Sages level, but as the interior hasn't actually changed that much, we're not going to spend much time here. That fourth Wraithheart is really interesting though. It's called Cave on the Mountain, and this icy ledge would have been outside the castle. Look closely at this still taken from an early video, and you'll see that there is a cave in the side of the mountain, and it does have what looks like ice coming out of it. Pretty cool, pun intended. Oh, another difference with this stage is the absence of certain filler goals, such as the plastic box on the bookshelf. That was added a lot later on. Not too exciting though. But I know what is interesting: the cut level, Talon's Maw. This sky level featured a lot of floating platforms behind the summit. Pretty much everything in this level got scrapped, but fortunately we have names and hints to give us some clues. The first one is titled Top of the World. The second is Egg Bash minigame. I don't know if this is actually a minigame about going around breaking eggs, or if it's a more general battle, but Vexx had to break an egg to access the arena or something like that. Now hint 3 refers to a certain goon, and I think you're going to see it's a familiar face. Yeah, it's our buddy the troll from the Below. This guy was a lot more important back then. He held a Wraithheart instead of a soul jar, and he seems to have been actually a legitimate boss battle. The way you had to fight him didn't really change so much though. Now there's some mysterious stuff in the secret hearts. The first one is titled Whitewater Race. Not really sure how that one would have played out, or even which level it was in. Okay, Down the Drain, we already know that one. Then that last one is called Dark Little Flower, some kind of a flower puzzle. Next, we're off to the Outer Islands with Undertow Tower. The first of 3 water stages, this one got cut from the game even though it seemed to be pretty far in development, at least judging by this footage. Though you may have noticed a few details that did make it into the final game. More on that in a minute. The first heart is simply titled X. The second one is called Boy, or Buoy if y'all are from America. I'm pretty sure that one is referring to the fish pond, which got moved to the Neverglades in the final game. I mean, you have to literally put the school of fish through a hoop. That lines up pretty well if you ask me. The third one here is of course the lighthouse that got transplanted all the way to the middle of the desert in the final game. Yeah, I haven't figured that one out. Must have been some crazy flooding there in the desert. And the fourth one is simply titled Race, but fortunately we have some more insight on it, thanks to early articles that talk about Vexx using a giant insect as a jet ski. Pretty wild stuff. It's also worth mentioning the soul jars in this level. This seems to be referring to the ruins that were moved to Dragonreach later on. Vexx would have collected actual soul jars instead of those 6 generic cube thingies. And the cut stages just keep on coming. This one is Submarilis, one of the better known missing stages. This level had the 3 towers clustered around a central minaret. Apparently this area could flood, but I don't have a whole lot of info on that. All I really know is that this area is mentioned to have a wet or dry state that it can be in, and the area that shows up in the final game is called AC2 Dry, which kind of makes sense because it's not flooded. Yeah. This may explain why the towers are mysteriously filled with water, even though the main area isn't. I wonder if maybe they were only accessible when the area was in flooded mode, but speculation. Anyway, onto the hearts. The first one is titled Minaret, which obviously refers to the central tower in the middle. The second one is called Manta Tag. One really cool detail about this is that even in the final game, you can go to the below, you can chase after the manta rays, and if you touch them, it makes a spark of light. Nothing else happens, but it's still pretty cool to see that leftover in the game. As for the fourth one, it looks as if the minaret had a second entrance. This seems to line up with my earlier finding that there's a stub of land inside the back of the tower, kind of implying that there was meant to be an entrance there. I guess that case is wrapped up then. The below seems to be almost identical to the final version. There's no volcano shown here, but spoilers, it shows up later. Also, there are mentions of Vexx using tubes to travel between the islands, so he could go from the below to Submarilis to Undertow Tower, and I guess back again, using these tubes. I don't know what this box with a tube inside it is in the final game, but I have a hunch that it might have been part of the tube technology system in the original. In the final, all it does is hold a soul jar. On to the secret hearts. The first one is titled Leviathan, but the hint is worded differently. I'm guessing that somewhere close engraved still means the instruction manual, but that's a pretty vague hint, so it's probably a good thing that they changed it. Oh, and speaking of vague hints, look at that second one. Ugh. It's that hint that caused so much frustration in the final game. It just made no sense. How was anyone supposed to know that you had to go to Timberdale to get a heart that's in Dragonreach? But when you think about it, it actually made sense here. If you're in the water world already, and you think of climbing a spire, the minaret is probably going to come to mind already. But the story doesn't stop there. Here's where it gets really frustrating. The developers wrote new and updated hints late in development. And they did write a new hint for this objective, and it does mention Timberdale. But they forgot to use it in the final game. Every other hint you see in this list was used, except for this particular one. Thanks, Acclaim. The Devil's Well. This volcano level had both an interior and an exterior. The interior is of course the one that's in the final game, at the bottom of the below. The exterior, on the other hand, was cut, at least mostly. Here are a few shots of it. This last one looks pretty fake, but I don't know, it still looks pretty cool. And right off the bat we've got missing content. The first heart here is called Race with Dragon. As with Shadow Vexx, the path data for this dragon is in the final game, but there's just no way to use it. After that, it's a few familiar goals, including the smoldering mound nearby a compass point. This did make it into the final game, but it ended up being a part of Citadel of Shadows. Also, its inclusion in the Devil's Well level might explain why a piece of it can be seen at the bottom of the volcano in the final game. The Pyroseum was a little bit less lucky than the previous stage. It was cut almost entirely. The first objective here is called 3 Balls Sleuths? I don't know. Moving on. The next one is called Catacombs, and this one was transplanted into Frostblight Mill in the final game. And next up is called Map Room. I don't know what this would have looked like, but it looks like the data is at least partially in the final game. It seems to have been moved to the Citadel of Shadows in the final, but unfortunately the data is incomplete, and when I tried to load it, it just crashed the game. I'm guessing it was cut right at the last minute. Sorrow's End. This creepy pyramid level also had an interior and an exterior. While the exterior area was removed, the interior remained, and is now inside the Vexx head from Summit of the Sages. Of course, you'll recognize goals 1 and 5 here, but the others are all unfamiliar. The second one is called Top of Pyramid, the third is Flipping Ramps Inside Pyramid, and the fourth is simply called Boss. And yeah, it's pretty obvious who you'd be facing here, judging by the description. This early screenshot uses what looks like a strange camera angle, which is probably because the floor is tilting. Still more mysterious stuff in the Secret Hearts. The first is titled Rock Suit Boy, Bottom of Colosseum. The next is Cannon Shot, Pyramid to Colosseum. Kinda sounds like a Super Mario 64 reference. And then we've got the last one in the list. At first glance, it might not look that familiar, but hey, we know a statue with downturned palms, don't we? Yeah, I didn't notice this at first, but if you look carefully at this screenshot, you can see it's the same statue in the background. Sure, it looks a lot more menacing with that lighting, but if you look carefully, you can see the glowing eyes, the outstretched hands, the lopsided jaw, the forked tongue hanging out of its mouth. It all matches. Seeing as the hint talks about a subterranean brother, I wondered if Vexx was to interact with the statue in the same way that he does in the final, or if there was a different puzzle here. Did the underground statue have glowing eyes already, and then Vexx had to go above ground and light the eyes of the statue up there? Maybe, but I didn't really think so. But then this caught my eye. Look really carefully. It almost looks like the statue's right arm, the one on our left, is discolored. Maybe Vexx was meant to move the arm or break it off entirely. So I decided to do a bit of investigating. Sure enough, the left arm is built in as part of the model. But the right arm is actually a separate object. You can see it's modeled on all sides, and they've even got the stub on the upper arm where it would break off. Notice that none of this applies to the left arm. It's staying where it is. In case you're wondering though, no, it doesn't seem like there's any way to interact with the hand in the final version. I've tried pounding on it and things like that. It doesn't break. Next up is Frostblight Mill. Not much to see here. All of the objectives made it into the final game, and the biggest change is that you can't get into the catacombs because obviously they were part of Pyroseum back then. As a side note, I don't know what's with this picture. It's an ice level that kind of looks like Frostblight Mill, but it all looks unfamiliar. Interestingly, you can see what looks like the back of the Citadel of Shadows in the background, kind of off to the right. So was this screenshot from Frostblight, or from the Citadel, or maybe from Mirrorim? This is the last of the cut levels. Unfortunately, these ones didn't get labels, so we can only guess at what they're about. Of course, they've still got the riddles. For that first one about the oaf, yes, our troll buddy is back, and he's ready for a rematch. Seeing as he's shown holding an orb instead of a Wraithheart, this must be a pretty old image. Because of that, we don't even know, like, is this actually Mirrorim, or is it from a test level, or who knows. Still, it's the only shot of the troll that we have that's not from Talon's Maw, so it does seem like a safe guess that this is probably from Mirrorim. As you can see, Vexx needs to use a very different strategy to defeat him. Not. The second hint here refers to water's deadly chill, implying that there was a way for Vexx to swim through the freezing water originally. I'm guessing this would have involved the water suit? This may explain why that mysterious Sigil 7 is hidden under the freezing water in the final game, inaccessible by normal means. We already know about the ring collecting game and the hop and drop game, but this third hint refers to a third minigame. It seems pretty clear that Vexx was actually meant to fight his foes directly. There are even a few references to this elsewhere in the text. This could be the hard mode version of the egg break minigame from Talon's Maw, but I don't know. Interestingly, the data for this fight minigame seems to have made it into the final game, with even the object layout being intact. Loading this stage up seems like it's about to work, and then, yeah, you guessed it, it crashes the game. Too bad, but maybe someone else can come up with a good way to hack it. Also, while I don't know a whole lot about this level, it appears that the shaft area, which ended up being inside the lantern from Summit of the Sages, was originally part of this level. This might explain all those random nooks and crannies in that area that seem to have no purpose in the final game. They probably hid soul jars and secret entrances and stuff before. There's even this long underwater tunnel in this area, even though jumping into the water instantly teleports you back to the main area of the summit. The final stage here is Citadel of Shadows. No surprises there. All of the Wraithhearts here are the same, and of course the biggest difference from the final is that there's no area under the castle, because obviously that compass area is in the volcano in the old build. And bring on the Secret Hearts for World 6. Here they are, although unfortunately I don't know a whole lot about them. Neat stuff though. Well, that concludes our look at the 144 hearts of the original Vexx. It was a lot of material to cover, I know, but I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed studying the game and trying to piece the mysteries together. This game and its history are pretty fascinating in my opinion. There's still more to be said about this game, and I'm hoping to cover that in a future video, but that's a video for another day. Until then, thanks for watching, and keep playing Vexx.